Chapter 1, The Whisper in the Ruins. The air in Delphi was heavy, thick with the scent of pine and dust, as if the mountains themselves were exhaling secrets. Eleni Kostas knelt in the shadow of a crumbling column, her fingers brushing against the cracked stone of the Temple of Apollo. The sun hung low, painting the ruins in hues of amber and gold, but the light felt wrong, too sharp, too alive, as if it were watching her. She adjusted her headlamp, its beam cutting through the dusk, illuminating a patch of earth where her trowel had uncovered something impossible. A papyrus scroll, brittle and yellowed, lay nestled in a clay vessel, untouched by time. It shouldn't have been there. Papyrus didn't survive 2,000 years in open ruins, not in the damp Greek soil, not without protection. Yet here it was, its edges curling like the lips of a sleeping oracle. Eleni's breath caught as she lifted the vessel, her hands trembling not from the cold but from the weight of what she held. She was no stranger to artifacts. Her career as an archaeologist had taken her from the sands of Crete to the tombs of Mycenae, but this felt different. The vessel was unadorned, no carvings, no paint, just smooth clay baked to a dull sheen. It was too plain, too deliberate, as if meant to be overlooked. She pried open the lid, the clay grinding softly, and the scroll inside seemed to hum, a faint vibration against her fingertips. Her headlamp flickered, just for a moment, and the air grew colder, pressing against her skin like a warning. "Eleni, you're still here." Samuel Carter's voice broke the silence, his American accent sharp against the quiet of the ruins. He stood at the edge of the excavation site, his silhouette framed by the fading light, his glasses glinting as he squinted down at her. A historian with a penchant for Greek mythology, Samuel was her unlikely partner on this dig, funded by a small university grant to catalog overlooked sites in Delphi. He was brilliant but insufferable, always chasing myths while she chased facts. "It's nearly dark. The crew's packing up." "Look at this," Eleni said, her voice low, almost reverent. She held up the vessel, the scroll still inside, its presence pulling at her like a tide. Samuel's eyes widened, and he scrambled down the rocky slope, his boots kicking up dust. He crouched beside her, his breath quickening as he peered into the vessel. "Papyrus," he whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Here? That's impossible." "Exactly," Eleni said, her skepticism warring with the thrill in her chest. "It's sealed, airtight. Someone hid this, Samuel. On purpose." Samuel reached for the scroll, but Eleni pulled the vessel back, her instincts screaming caution. "Not here," she said. "We need a controlled environment. This could disintegrate if we're not careful." He nodded, though his eyes never left the scroll, hungry, almost possessed. "What do you think it is? A prayer? A map?" Eleni didn't answer. She didn't know, and that scared her. She'd spent years decoding fragments of linear B, piecing together trade records and royal decrees, but this felt like something else, something that didn't belong in a museum. She stood, clutching the vessel to her chest, and scanned the ruins. The columns of the temple loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching long and thin across the ground. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of something dark, slipping between the stones, but when she blinked, it was gone. "Let's get it to the lab," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. They climbed out of the excavation pit, the wind picking up, carrying the faint scent of myrrh, strange, out of place. Eleni's headlamp flickered again, and this time, it didn't come back on. She cursed under her breath, switching to her phone's flashlight, but the beam seemed weaker, swallowed by the growing darkness. The lab was a makeshift tent at the edge of the site, filled with laptops, microscopes, and crates of pottery shards. Eleni set the vessel on a table, her hands steady now, years of training overriding her unease. Samuel hovered behind her, his excitement palpable, but she ignored him, focusing on the scroll. She donned gloves, her movements precise, and gently lifted the papyrus from its clay prison. It was heavier than it should have been, as if the words themselves carried weight. The surface was covered in tight, angular script, not Greek, not linear B, but something older, more jagged, like the etchings she'd seen in rare temple inscriptions. "It's not a prayer," Samuel said, leaning over her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at the symbols. They're instructional. Like a ritual." Eleni squinted at the text, her heart pounding. The script was interspersed with drawings, serpents coiled around stars, eyes that seemed to watch her, and a single word repeated in bold strokes: Pythia. The Oracle of Delphi. Her stomach twisted. The Pythia were priestesses, conduits for Apollo's prophecies, their words shaping empires. But this scroll wasn't a record of their visions. It was a guide, a manual, as if someone had written down the mechanics of speaking to the gods. Before she could process it, a sound cut through the tent, a low, guttural hum, like a voice trapped in stone. Eleni froze, her eyes darting to Samuel, who looked just as startled. The sound grew louder, rhythmic, like a chant, but no one else was in the tent. The air felt heavy, pressing against her chest, and the scroll seemed to pulse under her fingers, warm, alive. She dropped it, stumbling back, her phone clattering to the ground. "What the hell was that?" Samuel whispered, his face pale. Eleni didn't answer. She grabbed her phone, the screen now cracked, and shone the light around the tent. Nothing. Just crates, equipment, and the scroll lying innocently on the table. But the air was different now, charged, like the moment before a storm. She stepped outside, her breath visible in the cold night air, and scanned the ruins. The columns stood silent, but the shadows seemed deeper, more defined, as if they were listening. "We need to seal this," she said, her voice shaking. "Now." Samuel nodded, but his eyes were still on the scroll, a mix of fear and fascination. "Eleni, if this is real, if it's what I think it is." "Don't," she snapped, cutting him off. "We don't know what it is. Not yet." But deep down, she knew he was right. This wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, and someone or something didn't want it found. As they packed the scroll into a padded case, Eleni's phone buzzed, a single message from an unknown number: "Leave it buried." She stared at the screen, her blood running cold. The message was in Greek, but the phrasing was archaic, like something from a dead language. She showed it to Samuel, who shook his head, his face ashen. "We didn't tell anyone about this," he said. "Not even the crew." Eleni swallowed, her eyes drifting back to the ruins. The wind howled, carrying that faint scent of myrrh again, and for a moment, she thought she heard it, a whisper, not from the wind, but from the stones themselves. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but it felt like a name, ancient and heavy, pulling at her mind. She slammed the case shut, the sound echoing in the tent like a gunshot. They left the site in silence, the scroll locked in the case, but the weight of it followed them. Back in Athens, Eleni couldn't sleep. The whisper lingered in her dreams, a woman's voice, low and urgent, speaking words she couldn't understand. The next morning, she found an email in her inbox, sent from a Vatican server, requesting the scroll be transferred to Rome for further analysis. The email was signed by a Father Matteo Rossi, a name she'd never heard before, but the tone was formal, almost commanding. She called Samuel, her voice tight. "They know. Someone told them." "Who?" Samuel asked, his voice crackling over the phone. "We didn't report it." Eleni didn't answer. She stared at the case, the scroll inside it silent but heavy, like a heartbeat. The Vatican's interest wasn't a surprise. Her years in the field had taught her they had a way of finding things, but the speed of it, the secrecy, set her nerves on edge. She thought of the message on her phone, the whisper in the ruins, the way the scroll had felt alive under her touch. This wasn't just history. It was something more, something that scared even the church. As she prepared to ship the scroll, a shadow passed over her window, too quick to be a bird, too large to be a trick of the light. She froze, her heart hammering, and checked the locks on the case. The whisper came again, clearer this time, not in her ears but in her mind, "Speak my name." She dropped the phone, the screen still glowing with the Vatican's email, and backed away from the case. The air grew cold, the scent of myrrh filling the room, and somewhere in the distance, she swore she heard the hiss of a serpent. What had she uncovered? And why did it feel like the ruins were still watching her? If you found a scroll like this, would you read it, or leave it buried? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to uncover the next secret of Delphi. Chapter 2, The Vatican's Silent Alarm. The Vatican's apostolic archive was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, its corridors lined with shelves that stretched into darkness, each one groaning under the weight of centuries. Father Matteo Rossi moved silently through the aisles, his black cassock blending into the gloom, the only sound a faint rustle of his robes and the distant drip of water somewhere deep in the stone walls. The air was heavy with the smell of old parchment and wax, a scent that clung to his skin like a second shadow. In his hand, he held a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed, marked only with a red wax seal bearing the crossed keys of St. Peter. The message inside had arrived just before dawn, delivered by a courier who vanished without a word. Matteo's heart thudded as he broke the seal, the paper crackling like dry bones. The words were brief, written in Latin, but their weight was unmistakable. "Delphi papyrus located. Retrieve immediately. No record permitted." Matteo's fingers tightened around the paper, his mind racing. He was no stranger to the Vatican's quiet missions, tasks assigned in whispers, never documented, never discussed. At 42, he had spent half his life in service to the Church, his knowledge of ancient languages and rituals making him a valuable asset to the congregation for the doctrine of the faith. But this was different. The mention of Delphi, the oracle, stirred something in him, a memory, or perhaps a warning, buried deep in his studies. He had read about the Pythia, the priestesses who spoke for Apollo, their words bending the fates of kings and empires. The Church had dismissed them as pagan myths, but Matteo knew better. He had seen the forbidden texts, the ones locked in lead-lined vaults, their pages whispering of powers that didn't bow to crosses or altars. He slipped the envelope into his pocket and descended deeper into the archive, his footsteps echoing off the cold stone. The section he needed was restricted, accessible only by a key he carried on a chain around his neck. The door was unmarked, its iron surface pitted with age, but Matteo knew it by heart. He turned the key, the lock groaning as if reluctant to yield, and stepped into a chamber lit only by a single oil lamp. The air here was colder, sharper, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls and codices, some so old they crumbled at a touch. But Matteo's eyes were drawn to a single wooden box, its surface carved with serpents and stars, symbols that matched the descriptions in the email from Athens. He opened the box, revealing a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle but intact. It belonged to a Jesuit priest from the 17th century, Father Antonio Velli, who had been sent to Delphi on a mission much like Matteo's. The journal was a forbidden relic, its existence known only to a handful of clerics. Matteo's fingers trembled as he turned the pages, the ink faded but legible. Velli had written of a papyrus, discovered in the ruins, that described a ritual to summon the oracle's voice, a ritual that could reshape the threads of time. The final entry was scrawled in haste, the words uneven, "They know. The shadow moves. It must not be spoken." Below it, a single symbol, a serpent coiled around a flame. Matteo closed the journal, his pulse quickening. The papyrus in Athens was no coincidence. It was a piece of a larger puzzle, one the church had buried for centuries. He thought of the stories whispered among the archivists, tales of priests who had read forbidden texts and lost their minds, of rooms sealed after strange lights and voices filled the night. He had always dismissed them as superstition, but now, standing in this silent chamber, he wasn't so sure. The air felt charged, as if the walls were listening, and for a moment, he swore he heard a faint hum, like a voice trapped in the stone. He left the archive and made his way to the office of Cardinal Lorenzo Bianchi, the man who had summoned him. The cardinal's chambers were opulent, all polished marble and gold leaf, but the air was thick with tension. Bianchi stood by a window overlooking St. Peter's Square, his back to Matteo, his hands clasped tightly behind him. The cardinal was old, his face lined with years of secrets, but his eyes burned with a sharpness that belied his age. "You've read the message," Bianchi said, not turning. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Eminence," Matteo replied, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "The papyrus is in Athens. With an archaeologist named Eleni Kostas." Bianchi turned, his gaze piercing. "She's already opened it?" "That's the problem. The words are awake now." Matteo frowned, unsure if the cardinal was speaking metaphorically. "Awake? It's just a scroll, Eminence. A historical artifact." Bianchi's lips twitched, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've read Velli's journal. You know what the oracle's words can do. They're not just history. They're instructions. And if spoken, they could unravel everything we built." Matteo's mind flashed to the journal, to Velli's warning about the shadow. "What are we dealing with, Eminence? A prophecy? A curse?" Bianchi stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The oracle didn't just predict the future, Matteo. She shaped it. Her words were a bridge, a way to speak to forces older than our God. The Church cannot allow that bridge to be crossed again." Matteo's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to say that the oracle was a myth, that the Church's fear was rooted in superstition. But he remembered the hum in the archive, the weight of the journal in his hands, the way the serpent symbol seemed to pulse under his touch. "What are my orders?" he asked. "Retrieve the papyrus," Bianchi said. "By any means necessary. Costas and her colleague, Carter, are already asking questions. They must be stopped before they read further." And Matteo the cardinal paused, his eyes narrowing. "Do not read the words aloud. Not even in your mind." Matteo nodded, but as he left the cardinal's office, doubt gnawed at him. He had been trained to obey, to trust the Church's wisdom, but something about this mission felt wrong. The Vatican's urgency, the secrecy, the mention of a shadow, it all pointed to a truth they weren't telling him. He returned to his quarters, a small room in the Vatican's guest house, and opened his laptop. The email from Athens was still there, attached with a single image, a photograph of the papyrus, its script sharp and angular, the serpent symbol glaring from the center like an eye. He zoomed in, his breath catching. The text was in a dialect of ancient Greek, mixed with symbols he recognized from forbidden texts the church had labeled heretical. One phrase stood out, repeated 3 times, "Speak the flame, and the world bends." It wasn't a prayer or a prophecy. It was a command, a ritual, and Matteo felt a chill as he realized what it meant. The papyrus wasn't just a record of the oracle's power. It was a manual to wield it. That night, he couldn't sleep. The room felt too small, the air too thick, as if the walls were pressing in. He lit a candle, an old habit from his days in the seminary, and stared at its flame, its light flickering like a heartbeat. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming not from the room but from inside his head. It wasn't Italian, not Latin, but a language older, softer, like the hiss of a serpent. He froze, the candle flame bending as if caught in a draft that didn't exist. The whisper grew louder, forming a single word, Pythia. Matteo extinguished the candle, his hands shaking, and sat in the dark, his heart pounding. He thought of Veli's journal, of the warning scrawled in frantic ink. The shadow moves? He didn't know what it meant, but he felt it now, a presence lingering just beyond his sight, watching, waiting. The papyrus was in Athens, with Eleni Kostas, but it was already reaching him, pulling him into its orbit. He packed a small bag, slipping the journal inside, and booked a flight to Greece. The church had given him a mission, but the whisper had given him a question: what did the Vatican fear more than the devil himself? As his plane lifted off, the city of Rome shrinking below, Matteo's thoughts drifted to the oracle, to the women who had once spoken for gods. The church had buried their story, but stories have a way of rising. And this one, he feared, was only beginning. If you were Matteo, would you obey the church or follow the whisper? Comment below, and subscribe to unravel the next secret of Delphi. Chapter 3, The Oracle's Last Prophecy. The Athens lab was a cramped, fluorescent-lit room tucked away in the basement of the National Archaeological Museum, its walls lined with steel cabinets and humming air purifiers. The air smelled of antiseptic and old stone, a sterile contrast to the wild, earthy scent of Delphi's ruins. Eleni Kostas stood over a workbench, her gloved hands steady as she examined the papyrus scroll under a magnifying lens. The brittle surface seemed to shimmer under the light, its jagged script and coiled serpent symbols refusing to yield their secrets easily. She hadn't slept since the discovery 2 days ago, not since the whisper in the ruins and the cryptic message on her phone, "Leave it buried." The words echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. This was science, not superstition. Yet the scroll felt alive, its weight pulling at her like a tide she couldn't resist. Samuel Carter paced behind her, his laptop open to a database of ancient Greek dialects. His glasses slipped down his nose as he muttered to himself, cross-referencing symbols with texts he'd studied for years. Samuel was a historian, not an archaeologist, more comfortable with myths than artifacts, but his obsession with the Oracle of Delphi made him indispensable. He'd spent a decade chasing stories of the Pythia, the priestesses who channeled Apollo's voice, their prophecies shaping the ancient world. Now, standing in the lab with a real piece of that history, he was electric with anticipation, his voice sharp with excitement. It's not just a record, Eleni, he said, pointing to a line of text on the papyrus. This isn't a prayer or a poem. It's a ritual. Look at the structure: repetitive phrases, specific instructions. It's like a manual for something. Eleni adjusted the lens, her eyes narrowing at the text. The script was a mix of ancient Greek and an older, Proto-Cretan dialect, interspersed with symbols that didn't belong to any known alphabet. One phrase stood out, repeated in bold strokes: "Speak the flame, and the world bends." She felt it chill, the same words Father Matteo had read in Rome, though she didn't know it yet. Below the phrase was a drawing of a serpent coiled around a flame, its eyes rendered with unsettling precision, as if they were watching her. She shook off the thought, blaming her lack of sleep, but the air in the lab felt heavier now, the hum of the air purifiers taking on a rhythmic pulse, like a distant chant. "What kind of ritual?" she asked, her voice steady but tight. "Prophecy. Divination." Samuel stopped pacing, his eyes glinting with a mix of fear and fascination. "More than that. The Pythia didn't just predict the future. They shaped it. This scroll, it's about the last prophecy, the one the oracle gave before the temple fell silent. The one they said was cursed." Eleni frowned, her skepticism flaring. "Cursed? That's a myth, Samuel. The oracle stopped because Christianity took over. The temples were abandoned, not cursed." Samuel leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then why did the church burn every record of the Pythia's final words? Why did they send priests to Delphi to seal the caves where the oracles spoke? This scroll, it's proof. The last prophecy wasn't just a prediction. It was a command, a way to change reality itself." Eleni's fingers twitched, itching to touch the papyrus again, but she held back. She'd heard the stories every archaeologist had. The Oracle of Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, had been the heart of the ancient world, its priestesses revered as the voice of Apollo. Kings and generals knelt before them, their fates decided by cryptic words spoken in a trance. But the final prophecy, delivered in 362 CE as the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, was different. It was said to have driven the last Pythia mad, her words so dangerous that the temple was sealed, its priests scattered, and its secrets buried. Eleni had always dismissed it as legend, a tale spun to explain the decline of paganism. But now, staring at the scroll, she wasn't so sure. She turned to her laptop, pulling up a scan of the papyrus. The symbols glowed on the screen, their edges sharp despite the scroll's age. Samuel pointed to a section near the bottom, where the text shifted to a series of instructions: "Stand in the light of the seventh dawn. Speak the name of the flame. The serpent will rise, and the veil will part." Below it was a diagram, a circle of stars surrounding a serpent, its tail forming a spiral that seemed to pulse under the digital light. Eleni's headlamp flickered again, just as it had in the ruins, and the lab's fluorescent lights dimmed for a fraction of a second. She froze, her breath catching. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel nodded, his face pale. "It's not the equipment. It's the scroll. It's reacting." Eleni shook her head, refusing to entertain the idea. "It's just old. The ink might have some chemical property we don't understand yet. We need to send it for analysis, carbon dating, spectrometry." But Samuel wasn't listening. He grabbed a notebook and began scribbling, his hand moving furiously. "This is it, Eleni. The last prophecy. The Pythia didn't just see the future, she opened a door. This ritual, It's not about asking for a vision. It's about making one happen. The church knew it. That's why they wanted it gone. Elene's eyes darted back to the scroll, the serpent symbol staring up at her. She thought of the message on her phone, the whisper in the ruins. She wanted to dismiss Samuel's words, but the air in the lab felt wrong now, too thick, too cold, like the moment before a storm. She reached for her phone, intending to call her supervisor, but the screen was frozen, displaying the same message, "Leave it buried." The timestamp was impossible, 3:33 a.m., hours before she'd even found the scroll. "Samuel," she said, her voice trembling, "how did they know we had it?" He looked up, his pen pausing mid-stroke. "Who?" "The Vatican. They emailed me yesterday, demanding the scroll. Someone's watching us." Samuel's face darkened, his excitement giving way to unease. "They always know. The church has eyes everywhere, museums, universities, even dig sites. They've been hunting Delphic relics for centuries. Why do you think so few survive?" Elene's mind raced. She'd heard rumors of the Vatican's interest in ancient artifacts, stories of scrolls vanishing from museums, of archaeologists pressured to abandon their work. But this was different. The speed of their response, the urgency, it felt personal, as if the scroll itself had set off an alarm. She thought of Father Matteo Rossi, the name on the email, and wondered what kind of priest moved so quickly to claim a relic no one should have known about. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the lab, a low, resonant hum, like the one she'd heard in the ruins. It wasn't coming from the equipment or the air vents. It was coming from the scroll. The papyrus seemed to vibrate, the serpent symbol glowing faintly, as if lit from within. Eleni stepped back, her heart pounding, and Samuel dropped his notebook, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to stop," Eleni said, her voice shaking. "We're not ready for this." But Samuel was already reaching for the scroll, his fingers hovering over the text. "We can't stop now. This is bigger than us, Eleni. This is the truth the church tried to bury." The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and Eleni felt a pull, like a current drawing her toward the scroll. The serpent's eyes seemed to move, tracking her, and for a moment, she swore she saw a shadow flicker across the wall, a woman's silhouette, her head crowned with flames. The lights flickered again, plunging the lab into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back on. When they did, the scroll was still, the hum gone, but the air felt different, charged with an energy Eleni couldn't explain. She grabbed Samuel's arm, pulling him away from the scroll. "We're locking this up. Tonight. No more until we know what we're dealing with." Samuel nodded, but his eyes lingered on the papyrus, a hunger in them that unnerved her. They sealed the scroll in a climate-controlled case, but as they left the lab, Eleni couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The streets of Athens were quiet, the city bathed in moonlight, but the air carried a faint scent of myrrh, the same scent from the ruins. She glanced at Samuel, who was clutching his notebook like a lifeline, his face pale but resolute. Back in her apartment, Eleni double-checked the locks, her mind racing. She opened her laptop, intending to research Father Matteo Rossi, but the screen flickered, and a new email appeared, again from the Vatican. The subject line was simple: "Cease your work." The message was blank, but attached was a single image, a photograph of the serpent symbol, identical to the one on the scroll, but carved into a stone wall, its edges worn but unmistakable. The stone looked ancient, but the photo was time-stamped that morning. Elene's blood ran cold. Someone was sending a message, but it wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. She thought of the hum, the shadow, the words on the scroll, "Speak the flame, and the world bends." What kind of prophecy could scare the Vatican so much they'd act this fast? And what would happen if she spoke those words aloud? If you were Eleni, would you keep decoding the scroll, or send it to the Vatican? Share your thoughts below, and hit that subscribe button to uncover what the oracle's prophecy hides next. Chapter 4, The Forbidden Archive. The streets of Rome were alive with the chaos of evening tourists snapping photos of the Colosseum, street vendors hawking gelato, and the distant hum of Vespas weaving through traffic. But beneath the city, in a forgotten corner of the Vatican's apostolic archive, the world was silent, save for the faint creak of ancient wooden shelves and the occasional drip of water echoing through the stone corridors. Eleni Costas moved cautiously, her boots muffled against the cold floor, her breath visible in the dim light of a single electric bulb dangling from the ceiling. Beside her, Samuel Carter clutched a flashlight, its beam jittery as it swept across rows of locked cabinets, each one labeled in Latin with numbers that meant nothing to them. They weren't supposed to be here. No one was, not without clearance from the highest echelons of the Church. But the scroll from Delphi, now locked in a Vatican vault, had left them no choice. Eleni's heart pounded, her skepticism warring with the fear that had gripped her since the lab in Athens. The hum of the papyrus, the shadow of a woman with flaming eyes, the cryptic emails from Father Matteo Rossi, it was all too much to dismiss as coincidence. Samuel had convinced her to come to Rome, to find answers before the Vatican buried the scroll forever. He'd called in favors from an old colleague, a disgraced archivist who'd slipped them a keycard to a service entrance, no questions asked. Now, standing in the heart of the Church's most guarded archive, Eleni wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. "This place gives me the creeps," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. His glasses fogged slightly in the chilly air, and he wiped them on his sleeve, his eyes darting to the shadows. "It's like walking into a tomb." "It is a tomb," Eleni replied, her voice low but sharp. "A tomb for secrets the Church doesn't want anyone to know." She adjusted the strap of her backpack, which held a notebook, a camera, and a small recorder, tools of her trade, now turned to something closer to espionage. The air smelled of dust and wax, heavy with the weight of centuries, and every step felt like a violation, as if the walls themselves were watching. They'd come for the Archivum Secretum, the Vatican's secret archive, a place whispered about in academic circles but rarely seen. Rumors spoke of forbidden text scrolls, codices, and manuscripts deemed too dangerous for the world. Eleni had always thought the stories exaggerated, a mix of conspiracy and wishful thinking. But the scroll from Delphi, with its serpent symbols and instructions to speak the flame, had changed everything. If the Vatican was moving this fast to claim it, there had to be more hidden here, records of why the Church feared the oracle's power. Samuel stopped at a heavy iron door, its surface etched with a faint symbol, a serpent coiled around a star, identical to the one on the papyrus. Eleni's stomach twisted. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She swiped the stolen keycard, and the lock clicked open with a groan that echoed like a warning. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder, carrying a faint scent of myrrh, the same scent that had haunted her in Delphi and Athens. "After you," Samuel said, his attempt at humor falling flat. Eleni shot him a look but took the lead, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The stairs were uneven, carved from stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. At the bottom, they found a small chamber, its walls lined with locked wooden cabinets, each one sealed with wax and marked with cryptic symbols. In the center stood a single reading table, its surface scarred with scratches that looked like claw marks. Above it, a brass chandelier hung motionless, its candles long since burned out, but the air felt charged, as if the room were holding its breath. Eleni approached a cabinet, her fingers tracing the serpent symbol on its lock. "This matches the papyrus," she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "Whatever's in here, it's connected." Samuel nodded, pulling a crowbar from his bag. "Let's find out." He wedged the tool into the lock, and with a sharp crack, the cabinet opened, revealing a stack of leather-bound folios and a single clay tablet, its surface etched with the same jagged script as the scroll. Eleni's breath caught as she lifted the tablet, its weight heavier than it should have been, like the papyrus in Delphi. The script described a campaign by the early church, in the 4th century, to silence the oracle of Delphi. It wasn't just abandonment, as history claimed. The church had sent priests to the temple, armed with orders to destroy its records and seal its sacred caves. One passage stood out, written in Greek, "The Pythia's words are a flame that burns the veil. They must be quenched, lest the world turn." "They didn't just let the oracle fade," Samuel said, his voice trembling with excitement. "They hunted it. They burned the prophecies, buried the priestesses' names." "Why? What were they so afraid of?" Eleni didn't answer. She was reading another passage, her flashlight shaking in her hand. It described a ritual, performed in secret by the last Pythia, to hide a prophecy so powerful it could reshape the divine order. The text mentioned a cave beneath the temple, sealed with a stone marked by a serpent, where the prophecy was inscribed. Anyone who spoke it aloud, under the light of a specific star, would summon the oracle's power and its curse. The final line was a warning: "The flame speaks, but the shadow listens." The air grew colder, the scent of myrrh stronger, and Eleni's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. She thought she saw movement, a flicker of a woman's silhouette, her eyes glowing like embers, but when she turned, there was nothing. Just the tablet, the folios, and the oppressive silence of the archive. Samuel was already flipping through one of the folios, his hands shaking as he read aloud in a whisper, "The church called it heresy, but the oracle called it truth. The gods are not silent, they wait." "Stop reading," Eleni snapped, her voice cutting through the stillness. "We don't know what this does." Samuel looked up, his face pale but defiant. "We're here for answers, Eleni. This is it. The church didn't just fear the oracle, they stole its power. They rewrote it, turned prophecies into prayers, but they couldn't erase everything. This tablet, this folio, it's proof." Before Eleni could respond, a sound echoed through the chamber, a low, resonant hum, like the one in the Athens lab. It wasn't coming from the tablet or the folios, but from the walls themselves, as if the stone were singing. The chandelier above them swayed slightly, though there was no draft, and the scratches on the table seemed to glow faintly, like veins of light. Eleni's heart raced, her mind flashing to the whisper in Delphi, the shadow in Athens. She grabbed Samuel's arm, pulling him toward the stairs. "We're leaving. Now." But Samuel resisted, clutching the folio. "We can't stop now. This is bigger than us. The prophecy, it's still alive." The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and Eleni felt a pull, like a current drawing her back to the tablet. The serpent symbol seemed to pulse, its eyes alive with an unnatural glow. She thought of the Vatican's email, the speed of their response, the way Father Matteo Rossi's name had appeared out of nowhere. They weren't just hiding history, they were guarding something, something that could still act, still change things. As they climbed the stairs, the hum followed, echoing in Elena's ears like a voice she couldn't understand. The keycard barely worked to open the door, its lock grinding as if reluctant to let them go. Back in the main archive, they slipped into the shadows, their footsteps muffled but frantic. Elena's mind raced with questions. Why had the church gone to such lengths to bury the oracle's secrets? What was the prophecy they feared so much? And why did it feel like the serpent was watching them, even now? Outside, Rome glittered under the night sky, oblivious to the secrets beneath its streets. Eleni and Samuel ducked into an alley, their breaths ragged, the folio and a photograph of the tablet tucked into her backpack. But as they reached their hotel, Eleni's phone buzzed with a new message, this time from an unknown number. The flame is lit. You cannot unsee it. Attached was a photo of the archive chamber they just left, taken from above, as if someone had been watching them the whole time. Eleni's blood ran cold. The serpent's eyes seemed to follow her, even in her mind, and somewhere in the distance, she swore she heard the hum again, low and insistent, like a voice calling her back to the ruins. If you were in that archive, would you take the tablet or leave it behind? Comment below, and subscribe to uncover what the Vatican is hiding next. Chapter 5, The Shadow Moves. The safe house in Rome was a crumbling apartment tucked above a noisy trattoria in Trastevere, its walls stained with age and its windows rattling in the night wind. Eleni Costa sat on a sagging couch, the stolen folio from the Vatican archive open on her lap, its brittle pages glowing faintly under the dim light of a single lamp. The air smelled of stale coffee and the faint, unsettling trace of myrrh that seemed to follow her everywhere now. Her hands shook as she traced the serpent symbol etched into the leather cover, its coils wrapping around a flame that seemed to pulse with every flicker of the lamp. Across the room, Samuel Carter hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he cross-referenced the folio's Greek text with obscure academic databases. The photograph of the clay tablet, with its cryptic warning "The flame speaks, but the shadow listens," lay on the table between them, its edges curling as if resisting the light. Eleni's eyes darted to the window, where the Roman skyline glittered under a moonless sky. Since their raid on the Apostolic Archive 2 nights ago, the city felt different, its shadows deeper, its sounds sharper. The hum from the archive, that low, resonant chant, lingered in her ears, waking her from fitful sleep with whispers she couldn't decipher. The message on her phone, "The flame is lit. You cannot unsee it," had been followed by another, sent just before dawn, "Stop now, or the shadow will find you." No sender, no traceable number, just the same archaic Greek that haunted the scroll from Delphi. She hadn't told Samuel about the second message. He was already too deep in the mystery, his obsession with the oracle's prophecy bordering on reckless. "Eleni, you need to see this," Samuel said, his voice cutting through the silence. He turned his laptop toward her, the screen displaying a scanned page from a 17th century Jesuit journal, its Latin text interspersed with symbols that matched the folio. "It's about the Pythias final prophecy. The church didn't just destroy the records, they sealed the caves where the oracles spoke, claiming they were cursed. But this journal says the caves weren't empty. They hid something, a relic, maybe, or a stone inscribed with the prophecy itself." Eleni frowned, her skepticism flaring despite the unease gnawing at her. "A relic? Samuel, we're archaeologists, not treasure hunters. The prophecy is a story, a myth to explain why Delphi fell. The church didn't need a curse to shut it down, they had power." Samuel's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "Then why go to all that trouble? Why burn scrolls, seal caves, and chase a papyrus across continents. This folio, he tapped the leather cover, says the last Pythia didn't just predict the fall of the temple. She left a ritual to bring it back, to summon Apollo's voice again. And the church has been terrified of it ever since. Before Eleni could argue, the lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. The air grew heavy, the scent of myrrh sharper, and a low hum vibrated through the floor, like the pulse of a distant heart. Eleni froze, her eyes locking on the folio. The serpent symbol seemed to writhe, its lines glowing faintly, as if the ink were alive. Samuel didn't notice, his focus on the laptop, but Eleni's heart pounded as she heard it again, the whisper from Delphi, soft but insistent, forming a single word, Pythia. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel looked up, his brow furrowed. "Hear what?" The hum stopped, the lamp steadied, but the air remained charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Eleni stood, her eyes scanning the room. The shadows seemed wrong, too sharp, too defined, as if they were hiding something. She crossed to the window, peering into the street below. The trattoria was still bustling, its lights warm and inviting, but the alley across the way was dark, and for a moment, she swore she saw a figure, a woman, her silhouette framed by a faint glow, her eyes white as embers. Eleni blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving only the flicker of a street lamp. "We're not safe here," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone's watching us." Samuel followed her gaze, his face paling. "The Vatican?" "Maybe," Eleni said, but she wasn't sure. The messages, the hum, the shadow, it felt bigger than the church, older, as if the scroll itself had awakened something. She turned back to the folio, her fingers hovering over the text. The words described a cave beneath Delphi's temple, sealed with a stone marked by a serpent, where the last Pythia had hidden her prophecy. The ritual to unlock it required a specific chant, spoken under the light of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. The final line chilled her: "The one who speaks the flame becomes the flame, but the shadow claims its own." The lamp flickered again, and this time, it went out, plunging the room into darkness. Eleni's breath caught as the hum returned, louder now, vibrating in her chest. Samuel fumbled for his flashlight, but before he could switch it on, a sound cut through the silence, a soft, deliberate knock at the door. 3 slow taps, each one echoing like a heartbeat. Eleni's blood ran cold. No one knew they were here, not even their disgraced archivist contact. "Don't answer it," she whispered, grabbing Samuel's arm. He nodded, his face ashen, but the knock came again, slower, heavier, as if the door itself were groaning. The air grew colder, the scent of myrrh overwhelming, and Eleni felt a pull, like a current dragging her toward the door. The folio on her lap seemed to pulse, its pages warm under her fingers. She slammed it shut, the sound sharp in the silence, but the hum didn't stop. It grew, weaving into a chant, words she couldn't understand but felt in her bones, like a memory she'd never known she had. Samuel switched on the flashlight, its beam trembling as it swept the room. The shadows moved, not with the light but against it, coiling like smoke. Eleni's eyes locked on the window, where the woman's silhouette appeared again, closer now, her form flickering like a flame. Her eyes were white, unblinking, and her lips moved, forming words Eleni couldn't hear but felt, a whisper that crawled inside her mind: "Speak my name." The knock came again, louder, and the door rattled in its frame. Samuel dropped the flashlight, its beam spinning across the floor, and Eleni grabbed the folio, shoving it into her backpack. "We need to go," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Now. They scrambled to the back of the apartment, where a fire escape led to the alley below. As they climbed down, the hum followed, echoing in the metal stairs, and the air grew thick with the scent of myrrh. Eleni's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, dreading what she'd see. The screen glowed with a new message, this time in English: "You cannot outrun the shadow." Attached was a photo of the apartment door, taken from inside the room they'd just fled, the serpent symbol from the folio carved into the wood. Eleni's heart raced as they hit the ground, the alley dark and narrow, the trattoria's noise a distant hum. Samuel clutched his laptop, his face pale but determined. "We need to find that cave," he said. "The prophecy, it's real, Eleni. And it's awake." She didn't argue. The shadow, the hum, the messages, they were no longer just warnings. They were proof. The oracle's power wasn't myth, and the Vatican wasn't just hiding it, they were guarding it, or running from it. As they slipped into the Roman night, Eleni felt the weight of the folio in her backpack, its warmth seeping through the fabric. The whisper came again, softer now, but clearer: "Pythia." She didn't know if it was calling her or warning her, but one thing was certain: the shadow was moving, and it knew their names. If you saw that shadow, would you keep searching for the prophecy or run? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to uncover what the oracle's shadow wants next. Chapter 6: The Warning Ignored. The train to Naples rattled through the Italian countryside, its windows streaked with rain that blurred the rolling hills into a watercolor haze. Eleni Costa sat by the window, her backpack wedged between her knees, the stolen folio from the Vatican archive pressed against her chest like a shield. The leather cover felt warm, almost pulsing, as if the serpent symbol etched into it were alive, its coils tightening with every mile. Across from her, Samuel Carter scribbled furiously in his notebook, his glasses slipping down his nose as he cross-referenced the folio's text with a digital scan of the Delphi papyrus. The air in the compartment was heavy, thick with the scent of damp wool and the faint, persistent trace of myrrh that clung to them like a ghost. Eleni's eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see the shadow from Rome, the woman with ember-white eyes staring back from the rain-soaked glass. The memory of the hum, the knock at the door, and the chilling message, "You cannot outrun the shadow," kept her on edge, her nerves frayed like the worn edges of the folio. They'd fled Rome at dawn, after the terrifying encounter in the Trastevere safe house. The photo of their apartment door, carved with the serpent symbol, had been the final straw. Someone or something knew their every move, and the Vatican's reach felt inescapable. Samuel had insisted they head to Naples, where an old contact, a retired professor named Sofia Moretti, might help them decode the folio's cryptic text. Eleni had agreed, not because she trusted Sofia, but because staying in Rome felt like walking into a trap. The train's rhythmic clatter was the only sound breaking the silence between them, but it did little to ease the tension. Eleni's phone sat dark in her pocket, turned off after the last message, but she could still feel its weight, as if it might buzz again with another warning. Samuel looked up, his eyes bright with a feverish intensity. "This is it, Eleni," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The folio confirms what the papyrus hinted at. The last Pythia's prophecy wasn't just words, it was a ritual to summon Apollo's power, to bend reality itself. The church didn't just bury it, they feared it could be used again." Eleni's jaw tightened. She wanted to dismiss his obsession as academic zeal, but the events of the past few days, the hum, the shadow, the messages, made her skepticism feel like a flimsy shield. "Samuel, we're in over our heads," she said, her voice sharp. "We stole from the Vatican. Someone's watching us, and that thing in Rome wasn't human. We need to stop. Stop. Samuel's voice rose, drawing a glance from a passenger across the aisle. He leaned closer, his words a fierce whisper. We can't stop. The folio says the prophecy is tied to a cave beneath Delphi, sealed with a serpent-marked stone. If we find it, we find the truth the church has been hiding for centuries. Elene's eyes fell to the folio, its pages open to a passage she'd read a dozen times since Rome. It described a ritual performed by the last Pythia in 362 CE, as the Roman Empire turned to Christianity. The text was chillingly precise: under the light of Sirius, speak the flame's name 3 times. The serpent will rise, and the veil between worlds will part. But beware, for the shadow guards the truth. A diagram accompanied the text: a circle of stars with a serpent at its center, its tail forming a spiral that seemed to pulse under her gaze. The warning was clear, but so was the promise: the ritual could unlock the oracle's power, a power the church had deemed heretical. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint hum, low and resonant, like the one in the Athens lab and the Vatican archive. It wasn't coming from the train's engine or the rattling windows, it was coming from the folio. She slammed it shut, her heart pounding, but the hum persisted, vibrating in her chest like a second heartbeat. Samuel froze, his pen hovering over his notebook, his eyes wide with recognition. You heard it, he whispered, not a question. Eleni nodded, her throat dry. It's not the train. It's the same sound. The compartment felt smaller now, the air thick with the scent of myrrh, sharp and cloying. Elene's eyes darted to the window, where the rain seemed to fall in slow motion, each drop catching the dim light like a prism. For a moment, she thought she saw a face in the glass, not her reflection, but a woman's, her eyes glowing white, her lips moving in a silent chant. Eleni blinked, and the face was gone, but the hum grew louder, weaving into words she couldn't understand but felt in her bones. Pythia. Speak my name. She stood, clutching the folio, and moved to the compartment door, peering into the corridor. The train was quiet, the other passengers dozing or reading, oblivious to the hum that filled her ears. Samuel followed, his flashlight in hand, its beam trembling as it swept the narrow hallway. We need to keep moving, Eleni said, her voice shaky but firm. If the Vatican's tracking us, we're not safe here. But Samuel wasn't listening. He opened the folio again, his eyes scanning the text with a hunger that unnerved her. Eleni, the ritual, it's not just about prophecy. It's about power. The Pythia could speak to the gods, change the course of history. If we can do that. No, Eleni snapped, grabbing his arm. You're not reading that aloud. Not after what happened in Rome. Samuel pulled away, his face flushed. You don't get it? The church didn't bury this because it's fake, they buried it because it works. The shadow, the hum, it's proof. The oracle's power is still here, and we're the ones who woke it. Before Eleni could argue, the train lurched, its brakes screeching as it slowed to a stop. The lights flickered, plunging the compartment into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back on. The hum stopped, but the air was electric, crackling with static. Elene's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, dreading what she'd see. The screen glowed with a new message, this time in Latin: Ignis loquitur, umbra spectat. Translated, it read, the flame speaks, the shadow watches. Attached was a photo of the train compartment, taken from above, showing Eleni and Samuel hunched over the folio, their faces lit by the lamp's dim glow. The timestamp was seconds ago. Eleni's blood ran cold. She grabbed Samuel's arm, pulling him toward the corridor. "We're getting off now." They stumbled through the train, the other passengers staring as they pushed past. The rain had stopped, and the platform at Naples was slick with puddles, reflecting the station's neon lights. Eleni's heart raced as they slipped into the crowd, the folio heavy in her backpack. The scent of myrrh followed them, mingling with the damp air, and she swore she saw the shadow again, a flicker of a woman's silhouette in a puddle, her eyes burning like embers. They found Sophia Moretti's apartment in a quiet corner of the city, its walls covered with books and artifacts from her decades studying Greek mythology. Sophia was a wiry woman in her 70s, her eyes sharp despite her age, her hands trembling slightly as she examined the folio. "You shouldn't have brought this here," she said, her voice low but firm. "The church has been hunting these texts since the 4th century. They called the Pythias rituals sorcery, but they weren't. They were science, a science of the soul." Eleni's eyes narrowed. "Science? Sophia, we've heard hums, seen shadows. This isn't science, it's something else." Sophia's lips twitched, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The ancients didn't see a difference. The Pythias trance, the chants, the star alignments, it was all precise, calculated. They could tap into something beyond us, something the church couldn't control. That's why they sealed the caves, burned the scrolls. But this, she tapped the folio, this is a key. And you've already turned it? The room grew colder, the scent of myrrh overwhelming, and Eleni felt the hum again, faint but growing, like a chant rising from the earth. Sophia's eyes darted to the window, where the city lights flickered, and for a moment, Eleni thought she saw the shadow taller now, its form clearer, a woman with a crown of flames. The hum formed words, soft but insistent, "Speak my name." Eleni slammed the folio shut, her hands shaking. "We need to destroy it," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't just history, it's dangerous." Samuel shook his head, his eyes blazing. "Destroy it? Eleni, this is our chance to know the truth. The church has lied for centuries. What if the prophecy could change everything?" Sophia watched them, her expression unreadable. "Be careful what you wish for," she said. "The flame speaks, but the shadow listens. And it's already found you." As they left Sophia's apartment, the hum followed, echoing in the Naples night. Eleni's phone buzzed again, and she didn't need to look to know what it would say. The shadow was moving, and the warning had been ignored. What would happen when the flame finally spoke? If you were Eleni, would you destroy the folio or keep searching for the prophecy? Comment below, and subscribe to uncover what the shadow wants next. Chapter 7, The Serpent's Call. The narrow streets of Naples twisted like veins, their cobblestones slick with the remnants of an earlier rain. Eleni Costas and Samuel Carter hurried through the shadows, their breaths shallow, the stolen folio tucked tightly in Eleni's backpack. The city hummed with life, laughter spilling from trattorias, the clink of wine glasses, the distant wail of a street musician's violin, but to Eleni, it felt like a mask, hiding something older, something watchful. The air carried the now familiar scent of myrrh, sharp and cloying, weaving through the damp night like a thread pulling them deeper into the unknown. Sophia Moretti's warning echoed in Eleni's mind, the flame speaks, but the shadow listens. She gripped the straps of her backpack, the folio's warmth seeping through the fabric, as if it were alive, urging her forward. They'd left Sophia's apartment an hour ago, her words ringing in their ears. The retired professor had confirmed what the folio suggested, The last Pythias prophecy was no mere prediction but a ritual to summon Apollo's power, a force capable of bending reality itself. Sophia had spoken of the serpent symbol, a coiled snake around a flame, as the key to the ritual, a sign of the Pythias connection to the divine. But her final warning had chilled Eleni to the bone. The serpent wasn't just a symbol. It was a call, and answering it came at a price. Now, as they moved toward the docks to meet a contact who could get them back to Delphi, Eleni felt the weight of that price pressing against her chest. Samuel walked beside her, his face pale but resolute, his notebook clutched like a talisman. "We're close, Eleni," he said, his voice low but fervent. "The folio mentions a cave beneath the temple of Apollo, sealed with a serpent-marked stone. If we can find it, we can perform the ritual, speak the prophecy. We can prove the church was wrong to bury it." Eleni's jaw tightened. And what if Sophia's right? What if this prophecy isn't a gift but a curse? You saw what happened in Rome, the shadow, the hum. We're not just digging up history, Samuel. We're waking something up. He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and desperation. "That's exactly why we can't stop. The church has controlled the narrative for centuries, telling us the oracle was pagan nonsense. But this," he gestured to her backpack, "this is proof they were afraid. The Pythia could speak to the gods, change the world. Don't you want to know what that power feels like?" Eleni didn't answer. She wanted to believe in facts, in science, but the events of the past week, the whispers, the shadows, the messages had cracked her certainty. The folio's text haunted her, under the light of Sirius, speak the flame's name 3 times. The serpent will rise. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a command, and the thought of speaking it aloud sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced at the alley behind them, half expecting to see the woman with ember-white eyes, but the shadows were empty. Or so she thought. They reached the docks, where their contact, a grizzled fisherman named Luca, waited by a small boat. Luca was a friend of Sophia's, a man who'd smuggled artifacts out of Greece during the war, his weathered face etched with stories he never told. He nodded as they approached, his eyes flicking to Eleni's backpack. "You got trouble following you," he said, his voice rough as the sea. "Better move fast." Eleni frowned. "Trouble? What do you mean?" Luca gestured to the water, where the moonlight danced on the waves. "Saw a man watching your hotel this morning. Black coat, no face I could make out. Didn't feel right." He spat into the water, a gesture of superstition. "You sure you want to go back to Delphi?" Eleni exchanged a glance with Samuel, her stomach twisting. The Vatican's reach was long, but this felt different, more personal, like the shadow itself was tracking them. "We don't have a choice," she said, climbing into the boat. Samuel followed, his notebook open, his eyes scanning the folio's text as if it held the answers to everything. The boat cut through the dark water, the hum of its engine blending with the slap of waves against the hull. Eleni sat at the bow, the folio in her lap, its warmth unsettling against her skin. She opened it cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the serpent symbol, its coil seeming to tighten under the beam. The text described the ritual in detail, a chant to be spoken at dawn, under the light of Sirius, in a cave beneath Delphi's temple. The words were simple but precise, a sequence of syllables in an ancient Greek dialect, interspersed with symbols that felt alive, as if they were waiting to be spoken. Eleni's fingers trembled as she traced the phrase, "Speak the flame, and the world bends." Then it came again, the hum, low and resonant, rising from the folio like a voice trapped in the pages. The boat's engine stuttered, the lights on the dashboard flickering, and Luca cursed under his breath, wrestling with the controls. Eleni slammed the folio shut, her heart racing, but the hum didn't stop. It grew, weaving into a chant, soft but insistent, forming words she couldn't understand but felt in her bones. Pythia. Speak my name. Samuel's eyes widened, his flashlight trembling as he aimed it at the water. Eleni, look, he whispered, his voice shaking. She followed his gaze, her breath catching. The waves around the boat were still, unnaturally so, their surface reflecting not the moonlight but a faint, golden glow, like firelight trapped beneath the water. In the center of the glow, a shadow moved, a woman's silhouette, her form flickering like a flame, her eyes white and unblinking. Eleni's heart pounded as the shadow raised a hand, pointing directly at her, its lips moving in a silent chant. The hum grew louder, vibrating in her chest, and the folio in her lap felt hot, almost burning. Luca, get us out of here. Eleni shouted, her voice breaking. Luca gunned the engine, but it sputtered, the boat lurching as if caught in an invisible current. The shadow in the water moved closer, its form clearer now, a woman in flowing robes, her hair crowned with flames, her eyes piercing through the darkness. Samuel clutched his notebook, his face pale but resolute, and began reading the folio's chant aloud, his voice trembling but defiant. Ignis loquitur, serpens oritur. Stop. Eleni grabbed his arm, yanking the notebook from his hands. Are you insane? You don't know what that does. But it was too late. The hum became a roar, the water around the boat churning, and the shadow rose, its form breaking the surface like a specter. The air crackled with static, the scent of myrrh overwhelming, and Eleni felt a pull, like a tide dragging her toward the shadow. Luca shouted, his voice lost in the roar, and the boat tilted violently, throwing them against the railing. The folio slipped from Eleni's lap, its pages fluttering open, and the serpent symbol glowed, bright as a flame, its eyes alive with an unnatural light. Then, as suddenly as it began, the roar stopped. The water stilled, the shadow vanished, and the boat's engine roared back to life. Eleni scrambled to close the folio, her hands shaking, but Samuel was gone. His notebook lay open on the deck, its pages blank except for a single symbol, a serpent coiled around a flame, drawn in ink that looked wet, as if freshly written. Luca stared at the water, his face ashen, his hands trembling on the wheel. Where is he? Eleni whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's hum. Luca didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The scent of myrrh lingered, and Eleni felt the folio's warmth again, like a heartbeat against her chest. Her phone buzzed, and she pulled it out, dreading what she'd see. The screen glowed with a new message, in archaic Greek, the serpent calls, but the shadow claims. Attached was a photo of Samuel, standing on the boat, his eyes white as embers, his lips moving in a silent chant. Eleni's blood ran cold. The shadow wasn't just watching, it was taking. And she was next. If you were Eleni, would you keep the folio or throw it into the sea? Comment below, and subscribe to uncover what the serpent's call demands next. Chapter 8, The First Victim. The boat rocked gently on the Naples harbor, its engine silent now, the waves lapping against the hull like whispers in the dark. Eleni Costas knelt on the deck, her hands trembling as she clutched Samuel Carter's notebook, its pages blank except for the serpent symbol, its ink glistening as if freshly drawn. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh, sharp and suffocating, mingling with the salty tang of the sea. Luca, the fisherman, stood at the helm, his weathered face pale, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for answers in the fading light. Samuel was gone, vanished in the chaos of the shadow's appearance, the glowing water, and the deafening hum that had shaken the boat just moments ago. Elene's heart pounded, her mind racing with the image of the woman in the water, her ember-white eyes and flaming crown, her silent chant echoing in Elene's bones, Pythia. Speak my name. She flipped through the notebook again, hoping for a clue, but the serpent symbol stared back, its coils tightening around a flame that seemed to pulse under her gaze. The folio, still in her backpack, felt heavier now, its warmth seeping through the fabric like a warning. She thought of Samuel's reckless words, his voice trembling as he read the chant aloud, Ignis loquitur, serpens oritur. The moment he'd spoken, the shadow had risen, and now he was gone, claimed by something Eleni couldn't name. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she hesitated, dreading another message. When she pulled it out, the screen glowed with the same archaic Greek, the serpent calls, but the shadow claims. The photo of Samuel, his eyes white as embers, burned into her mind. Luca, Eleni said, her voice hoarse, we need to get to shore. Now. Luca nodded, his hands shaking as he restarted the engine. This ain't right, he muttered, his voice rough. I've seen storms, pirates, but this is something else. He glanced at the notebook in her hands, his eyes narrowing. That thing you're carrying, it's cursed. You should throw it overboard. Elene's grip tightened on the notebook. I can't. It's all we have left of him. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. Samuel's disappearance wasn't an accident, it was tied to the folio, the ritual, the prophecy. She thought of Sophia's warning, the flame speaks, but the shadow listens. Had Samuel's chant awakened something, or had it marked him as a target? The boat lurched forward, cutting through the dark water, but the scent of myrrh followed, heavy and inescapable. They docked in a quiet corner of the harbor, the city's lights flickering like distant stars. Eleni stepped onto the pier, her legs unsteady, the folio and notebook weighing her down. Lucas stayed on the boat, his eyes darting to the water. Don't come back, he said, his voice low. Whatever you're chasing, it's not worth it. Eleni didn't respond. She hurried into the city, her footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, her mind racing. She needed to find Sophia again, to understand what had happened to Samuel. The retired professor's apartment was a short walk away, its windows dark except for a single candle flickering in the living room. Eleni knocked, her heart pounding, and Sophia opened the door, her face pale, her eyes sharp with unease. You're alone, Sophia said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. Eleni nodded, stepping inside, the scent of myrrh stronger now, mingling with the musty smell of old books. She set the folio and notebook on Sophia's table, her hands shaking. Samuel's gone, she said, her voice breaking. He read the chant from the folio, and something took him. A shadow, a woman with white eyes. I don't know what it was. Sophia's eyes narrowed as she opened the notebook, her fingers tracing the serpent symbol. The Pythia's call, she whispered, her voice heavy with dread. The ritual isn't just words, it's a summons. You don't just speak to the oracle, you invite her. And she doesn't come alone. Elene's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Sophia closed the notebook, her hands steady but her eyes haunted. The Pythia were conduits, vessels for Apollo's voice. But the last Pythia, the one who spoke the final prophecy, didn't just channel a god. She bound herself to something else, something older, something that lives in the shadows. The church called it a demon, but it wasn't. It was the serpent's power, the force that guards the prophecy. When Samuel spoke the chant, he opened the door. Elene's mind flashed to the woman in the water, her ember-white eyes, the hum that had shaken the boat. So it took him. Why? Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. The shadow claims what it wants. It's not random, it chooses those who speak the flame. Samuel wasn't prepared. None of us are. Eleni paced the room, her skepticism crumbling under the weight of what she'd seen. Then why didn't it take me? I've read the folio, touched the papyrus. Why him? Sophia's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. Because you haven't spoken the words aloud. Not yet. The ritual requires intent, a voice to carry the flame. Samuel gave it that, and the shadow answered. The candle on the table flickered, its flame bending as if caught in a draft that didn't exist. Eleni froze, her eyes darting to the window, where the city lights seemed to dim, the shadows outside growing sharper, more defined. The hum returned, faint but growing, like a chant rising from the earth. Sophia grabbed the folio, her hands trembling now, and opened it to a page Eleni hadn't seen before, a drawing of a woman in flowing robes, her head crowned with flames, a serpent coiled around her arm. Below it, in Greek, were the words, "The one who speaks becomes the flame, but the shadow claims its own." Elene's breath caught. That's her. The woman I saw. Sophia nodded, her face grim. The last Pythia. Or what's left of her. She's not gone, she's waiting. And now that the ritual has been spoken, she's awake. The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and Eleni felt a pull, like a current dragging her toward the folio. The serpent symbol glowed faintly, its eyes alive with an unnatural light, and for a moment, she swore she saw it move, its coils tightening around the flame. The candle flickered again, and the shadows on the walls twisted, forming shapes that weren't human, a woman's silhouette, her eyes glowing white, her lips moving in a silent chant. Eleni slammed the folio shut, her heart racing. "We need to destroy it," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't history anymore, it's a trap." Sophia shook her head, her eyes fixed on the window. "You can't destroy it. The prophecy is awake now. Destroying the folio won't stop it, it'll only make the shadow angrier." Before Eleni could argue, a sound cut through the room, a sharp, deliberate scratch, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, circling them like a predator. The candle went out, plunging the room into darkness, and the hum became a voice, low and insistent, "Pythia. Speak my name." Elene's phone buzzed, and she pulled it out, the screen glowing with a new message, "The flame is yours. The shadow waits." Attached was a photo of Sophia's apartment, taken from inside the room, showing Eleni and Sophia standing over the folio, their faces lit by the now extinguished candle. Elene's blood ran cold. She grabbed Sophia's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We're leaving. Now." But as they reached the threshold, the scratching stopped, replaced by a single, resonant knock. The door rattled, and the air grew heavy, the scent of myrrh overwhelming. Elene's eyes darted to the folio, its serpent symbol glowing through the leather cover, and she knew they weren't alone. The shadow had claimed Samuel, and now it was calling her name. What would you do if the shadow came for you? Run or face it? Share your thoughts below, and hit that like button to keep unraveling the oracle's curse. Chapter 9, The Hidden Temple. The road to Delphi wound through the rugged slopes of Mount Parnassus, its cliffs looming like silent guardians under a sky bruised with twilight. Eleni Costas gripped the steering wheel of the rented jeep, her knuckles white, the stolen folio and Samuel's notebook tucked in a padded case beside her. The air was crisp, heavy with the scent of pine and the faint, ever-present trace of myrrh that had followed her since Naples. Her heart still raced from the events in Sophia's apartment, the scratching in the walls, the glowing serpent symbol, the chilling message, "The flame is yours. The shadow waits." Samuel's disappearance haunted her, his face frozen in the photo on her phone, his eyes white as embers, his lips moving in a silent chant. She was alone now, Sophia having refused to come, her warning ringing in Eleni's ears, "The shadow claims what it wants." But Eleni couldn't stop. Not yet. The folio's text, its promise of a hidden cave beneath the temple of Apollo, drove her forward, a compulsion she couldn't explain. The jeep's headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the narrow road as it twisted toward Delphi's ruins. Eleni's mind churned with questions. The folio described a cave sealed with a serpent-marked stone, where the last Pythia had hidden her prophecy, a ritual to summon Apollo's power, to bend reality itself. But the warnings were clear: the one who speaks becomes the flame, but the shadow claims its own. Samuel had spoken the chant, and the shadow had taken him. Eleni's fingers tightened on the wheel, her skepticism battered but not broken. She was an archaeologist, trained to seek evidence, not chase myths. Yet the hum, the shadow, the messages, they were evidence, weren't they? Evidence of something older, something the church had buried for centuries. She reached the archaeological site just as the last light faded, the ruins of the temple of Apollo stark against the darkening sky. The columns stood like broken teeth, their shadows stretching long and thin across the sacred precinct. Eleni parked the jeep and stepped out, the air cold against her skin, the scent of myrrh stronger now, as if the mountain itself were exhaling it. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, the folio and notebook inside, and grabbed a flashlight, its beam trembling as it swept the ruins. The site was closed to tourists, but she'd bribed a local guard to look the other way, a trick she'd learned from years in the field. Still, she felt exposed, as if the mountains were watching, their silence heavy with judgment. The folio's map was crude, drawn in faded ink, but it pointed to a spot beyond the temple's altar, where a path descended into a ravine. Eleni followed it, her boots crunching on loose gravel, her flashlight catching glints of mica in the rocks. The path was overgrown, untouched for decades, maybe centuries, but the folio's instructions were precise: seek the serpent's mark where the earth swallows the light. Her heart pounded as she descended, the air growing colder, the scent of myrrh sharper, mingling with the damp smell of earth. The ravine narrowed, its walls closing in, and she felt a pull, like a current drawing her deeper, the same pull she'd felt in Rome and Naples. At the bottom of the ravine, she found it, a stone slab, half buried in the earth, its surface etched with a serpent coiled around a flame. The symbol glowed faintly under her flashlight, its lines sharp despite the centuries, as if carved yesterday. Eleni's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she traced the serpent's coils. This was no myth. The cave was real, hidden beneath the sacred precinct, just as the folio had promised. She knelt, brushing dirt from the slab, and found a seam, a crack wide enough to suggest an entrance. Her tools, a crowbar and chisel, were in her backpack, but as she reached for them, a sound stopped her cold, a low, resonant hum, like the one that had haunted her since Delphi. The hum wasn't coming from the stone but from the air itself, vibrating in her chest like a second heartbeat. The scent of myrrh grew overwhelming, and her flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as if swallowed by the darkness. Eleni's heart raced, her mind flashing to Samuel, to the shadow in the water, its ember-white eyes and silent chant. She stood, sweeping the flashlight across the ravine, but the shadows were wrong, too sharp, too alive, coiling like smoke. Then she saw it, a woman's silhouette, flickering at the edge of her vision, her form framed by a golden glow, her eyes burning like flames. The hum became a voice, soft but insistent, Pythia. Speak my name. Eleni stumbled back, her flashlight dropping to the ground, its beam spinning wildly. The shadow moved closer, its form clearer now, a woman in flowing robes, her hair crowned with flames, her eyes white and unblinking. Eleni's throat tightened, her hands fumbling for the folio, but the shadow raised a hand, pointing to the stone slab. The hum grew louder, weaving into a chant, words in an ancient tongue that Eleni felt rather than heard, pulling at her mind like a tide. She wanted to run, to scream, but her body wouldn't move, rooted to the spot as the shadow's eyes bored into her. Then, a new sound, a sharp crack, like stone splitting. The slab shifted, dust rising as it slid aside, revealing a dark passage beneath. The hum surged, the air crackling with static, and the shadow vanished, leaving only the scent of myrrh and the faint glow of the serpent symbol. Eleni's flashlight flickered back on, its beam illuminating the passage, its walls lined with carving serpents, stars, and eyes that seemed to watch her. The folio's warmth pulsed in her backpack, urging her forward, but fear held her back. This was the cave, the hidden temple where the last Pythia had sealed her prophecy. But what waited inside? She pulled out her phone, intending to take a photo, but the screen was frozen, displaying a new message in archaic Greek: the serpent opens the way, but the shadow walks with you. Attached was a photo of the ravine, taken from above, showing Eleni kneeling before the slab, the serpent symbol glowing under her flashlight. The timestamp was seconds ago. Her blood ran cold. Someone or something was watching, and it wasn't the Vatican. Eleni's mind raced. She thought of Samuel, his reckless chant, his disappearance. She thought of Sophia's warning, of the Church's centuries-long campaign to bury the oracle's power. The cave was real, the prophecy was real, but so was the shadow. She could turn back, leave the folio and the cave behind, but the hum, the scent, the pull, they were inside her now, a compulsion she couldn't shake. She took a deep breath, her flashlight steady now, and stepped into the passage, the darkness swallowing her like a mouth. The walls closed in, the air cold and damp, the carvings glowing faintly under her beam. The hum followed, weaving into a chant, and Eleni felt the folio's warmth against her back, like a heartbeat urging her deeper. The shadow was there, she knew, waiting in the dark. But so was the prophecy, and she was too close to turn back now. What lay at the heart of the hidden temple, and what would it cost to find it? If you stood before that cave, would you dare step inside? Drop a comment with your choice, and share this video to uncover what lies in the oracle's hidden temple. Chapter 10, The Ritual Revealed. The air inside the hidden cave beneath Delphi's Temple of Apollo was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and the ever-present trace of myrrh that clung to Eleni Costas like a second skin. Her flashlight beam trembled as it swept across the narrow passage, illuminating walls carved with serpents, stars, and unblinking eyes that seemed to follow her every step. The stolen folio, tucked in her backpack alongside Samuel's notebook, felt like a living thing, its warmth pulsing against her spine, urging her deeper into the darkness. The hum that had haunted her since the ruins, the low, resonant chant echoed faintly now, woven into the drip of water somewhere in the unseen depths. Eleni's heart pounded, her breath visible in the chilly air, her mind wrestling with the terror of Samuel's disappearance and the compulsion to uncover the truth. The cave was real, the serpent-marked stone had parted, and now she stood on the threshold of something ancient, something the Vatican had buried for centuries. She moved cautiously, her boots scraping against the uneven stone floor, the carvings growing more intricate as she descended. The walls told a story, scenes of priestesses in flowing robes, their heads crowned with flames, their hands raised to a sky filled with stars. One carving stood out, a woman, her eyes rendered as twin flames, a serpent coiled around her arm, its head resting on a stone altar. Above her, a single star shone brighter than the rest, its rays forming a spiral that matched the folio's diagram. Eleni's fingers brushed the carving, and a jolt ran through her, like static, sharp and electric. The hum surged, vibrating in her chest, and for a moment, she swore she heard a voice, soft but insistent, Pythia. Speak my name. She pulled her hand back, her heart racing, and opened the folio, its pages brittle under her flashlight's beam. The text described the ritual in chilling detail. At the seventh dawn, under the light of Sirius, stand before the altar of the flame. Speak the name 3 times, and the serpent will rise. The veil will part, and the prophecy will breathe. The instructions were precise: posture, tone, even the alignment of the stars, but the warnings were stark: the one who speaks becomes the flame, but the shadow claims its own. Eleni's mind flashed to Samuel, his reckless chant on the boat, his white-eyed image in the photo. Had he become the flame, or had the shadow claimed him? She reached the end of the passage, where the cave opened into a circular chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface etched with the same serpent symbol that haunted her, coiled around a flame, its eyes glowing faintly, as if lit from within. The air was heavier here, thick with myrrh, and the hum was constant now, a rhythmic chant that seemed to rise from the altar itself. Eleni's flashlight flickered, its beam dimming, and she felt a pull, like a tide dragging her toward the stone. She set her backpack down, her hands trembling as she opened the folio to the ritual's chant, its words in an ancient Greek dialect, interspersed with symbols that felt alive, pulsing under her gaze. Then she heard it, a whisper, not from the cave but from inside her mind, clear and urgent: speak my name. The voice was female, soft but commanding, and Eleni's eyes darted to the altar, where the serpent symbol glowed brighter, its coils seeming to writhe. She thought of the shadow in Naples, the woman with ember-white eyes, and her stomach twisted. This was no myth. The Pythia was here, or something was, and it wanted her to speak. She took a step back, her flashlight flickering again, and pulled out her phone, hoping to document the chamber. The screen was frozen, displaying a new message in archaic Greek: the flame awaits, but the shadow walks. Attached was a photo of the cave's entrance, taken from above, showing Eleni standing before the serpent-marked stone, her flashlight illuminating the glowing symbol. The timestamp was minutes ago. Her blood ran cold. Someone or something was watching, and it wasn't just the Vatican. Eleni's mind raced, her skepticism crumbling under the weight of what she'd seen. She thought of Sophia's warning, of Samuel's disappearance, of the Church's centuries-long campaign to bury the oracle's power. The ritual was real, its promise tantalizing: to speak the prophecy, to bend reality itself. But the cost was clear: Samuel had paid it, and she might be next. She flipped through the folio, searching for answers, and found a new passage, one she hadn't noticed before. It described a vision the last Pythia had seen, a world reshaped, empires falling, gods rising from the shadows. The prophecy wasn't just words, it was a key to something older, something the church feared more than heresy. The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and Eleni felt a presence, heavy and watchful, like eyes boring into her back. She turned, her flashlight sweeping the chamber, but the shadows were empty, or so she thought. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement, a woman's silhouette at the edge of the altar, her form flickering like a flame, her eyes white and unblinking. Eleni's breath caught, her body frozen as the shadow raised a hand, pointing to the altar. The hum became a chant, words in an ancient tongue that Eleni felt in her bones, pulling at her like a tide. Pythia. Speak my name. She stumbled back, her flashlight dropping to the ground, its beam spinning wildly. The shadow moved closer, its form clearer now, a woman in flowing robes, her hair crowned with flames, her eyes burning like embers. Eleni's heart pounded as she grabbed the folio, its pages warm under her fingers, and read the chant aloud, her voice trembling but resolute. Ignis loquitur, serpens oratur. The words felt heavy, alive, and the moment they left her lips, the hum surged, the altar's serpent symbol blazing with golden light. The air crackled, the shadows twisting, and Eleni felt a rush, like fire coursing through her veins. Then, a scream, not hers, but from the cave itself, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't natural. The shadow vanished, the hum stopped, and the altar's glow faded, leaving Eleni in darkness, her flashlight dead at her feet. She fumbled for her phone, its screen now blank, and lit a match from her backpack, its tiny flame trembling in the stillness. The chamber was empty, but the air was different, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. The folio lay open on the ground, its pages turned to a new passage. The flame is lit, the serpent rises. The prophecy lives, but the shadow follows. Eleni's hands shook as she gathered her things, the match burning low. She'd spoken the chant, just as Samuel had, and now the cave felt alive, its walls pulsing with a rhythm she couldn't hear but felt. She thought of Father Matteo Rossi, the Vatican's emissary, and wondered if he was still in Rome, or if he was closer, watching from the shadows. The prophecy was awake, and so was the shadow. What had she unleashed, and what would it demand? If you were standing in that cave, would you speak the chant or walk away? Drop a comment with your choice, and share this story to uncover what the oracle's ritual reveals next. Chapter 11, The Oracle Awakens. The hidden chamber beneath Delphi's temple of Apollo pulsed with an unnatural energy, its air thick with the scent of myrrh and the faint, metallic tang of something older, something alive. Eleni Costa stood before the stone altar, her hands trembling as she gripped the stolen folio, its pages open to the ritual she'd just spoken. Ignis loquitur, serpens oratur. The words had left her lips like a spark, igniting the air, and now the chamber felt different, charged, as if the walls themselves were breathing. The serpent symbol on the altar glowed with a golden light, its coils writhing under her gaze, and the hum that had haunted her since the ruins surged, no longer a whisper but a chorus, weaving ancient syllables into a chant that shook her bones. Her flashlight lay dead on the ground, its beam extinguished in the scream that had torn through the cave moments ago, a scream that wasn't hers, wasn't human. The folio's warning echoed in her mind, the one who speaks becomes the flame, but the shadow claims its own. Eleni's heart pounded, her breath shallow in the cold, damp air. The chamber's carving serpents, stars, and unblinking eyes seemed to move in the flickering light of her match, the only illumination left. She'd spoken the chant, just as Samuel had on the boat, and now the cave felt alive, its walls pulsing with a rhythm she couldn't see but felt, like a heartbeat from the earth itself. She thought of Samuel, his white-eyed image in the photo, his disappearance after speaking the same words. Had she made the same mistake, or was this what the prophecy demanded? The folio's text had promised a vision, a truth that could bend reality, but it hadn't prepared her for this: the weight of the air, the hum that seemed to speak her name, Pythia. She took a step back, her boots scraping against the stone floor, and scanned the chamber. The altar stood at the center, its serpent symbol blazing now, casting shadows that twisted like smoke. The carvings on the walls told a story: a woman with a flaming crown, her hands raised to a star-filled sky, a serpent coiled around her arm. The last Pythia, Sophia had called her, a priestess who'd bound herself to something older than Apollo, something the church had called a demon but feared as truth. Elene's eyes darted to the folio, its pages opened to a new passage she hadn't seen before: when the flame is lit, the oracle awakens. She speaks, and the world trembles. But beware, for her voice is not alone. The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and Elene felt a pull, like a tide dragging her toward the altar. She wanted to run, to seal the cave and leave the prophecy behind, but her body wouldn't move, rooted to the spot as the golden light from the serpent symbol intensified. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the chamber, a woman's silhouette, her form flickering like a flame, her eyes white as embers, her hair crowned with fire. The shadow from Naples, from Rome, from the ruins. The last Pythia. Elene's breath caught as the figure stepped forward, her robes flowing like liquid light, her presence filling the chamber with a weight that pressed against Elene's chest. The shadow spoke, her voice a low, resonant chant that wove through the hum, not in Greek but in a tongue older, softer, like the hiss of a serpent. The words were incomprehensible, but they burned in Elene's mind, forming images: cities crumbling, skies ablaze, a serpent rising from the earth, its coils wrapping around the stars. The vision was fleeting, but it carried a weight, a truth that made Elene's knees buckle. The shadow's eyes locked on hers, unblinking, and her lips moved, forming a single phrase in archaic Greek: the world bends, but the shadow claims. Elene stumbled back, her match burning low, its flame trembling in the stillness. The shadow raised a hand, pointing to the altar, and the hum became a roar, shaking the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, the carvings glowing with the same golden light as the serpent symbol. Elene's heart raced as the vision returned, clearer now: a world reshaped, empires falling, a new order rising under a sky of fire. The prophecy wasn't just a prediction, it was a command, a call to break the chains of history. But the shadow's words lingered, the shadow claims. What did it mean? Was the prophecy a gift, or a trap? The altar pulsed, its light flaring, and Elene felt a rush, like fire coursing through her veins. Her voice wasn't her own as she spoke again, the chant spilling from her lips unbidden: ignis loquitur, serpens oratur. The words were heavy, alive, and the moment they left her, the chamber shook, a low rumble rising from the earth. The shadow's form flickered, her eyes blazing brighter, and Elene saw her clearly now: a woman, not a specter, her face etched with sorrow and power, her hands trembling as if fighting to hold the flame. The hum became a voice, not one but many, chanting in unison, and Elene felt their weight, their truth, pulling at her soul. Then, a new sound: a sharp crack, like stone splitting. The altar split down the middle, revealing a hidden compartment, its edges glowing with the same golden light. Inside lay a small clay tablet, its surface etched with the serpent symbol and a single line of text: "Speak the flame, and the gods return." Eleni's hands shook as she reached for it, the shadow watching, her eyes unblinking. The tablet was warm, pulsing like the folio, and as Eleni touched it, the vision surged again: cities burning, skies splitting, a serpent rising to swallow the stars. But there was more, a figure, cloaked in shadow, standing at the edge of the world, its eyes white as embers, its voice her own. The shadow spoke again, her voice cutting through the hum, "You are the flame. Will you speak, or will you burn?" Eleni's heart pounded, her mind reeling. The prophecy was alive, its power real, but so was the shadow, its presence a warning she couldn't ignore. She thought of Samuel, of Sophia's fear, of the Vatican's relentless pursuit. The church hadn't buried the oracle out of superstition, they'd buried it because it worked. And now Eleni had awakened it, spoken its name, and the shadow was here, claiming its own. The chamber grew colder, the scent of myrrh overwhelming, and Eleni's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, the screen glowing with a new message in Latin, "Ignis vivit, umbra sequitur." Translated, "The flame lives, the shadow follows." Attached was a photo of the chamber, taken from above, showing Eleni standing before the altar, the shadow's silhouette looming behind her, its eyes blazing. The timestamp was seconds ago. Her blood ran cold. The shadow wasn't just in the cave, it was everywhere, watching, waiting. Eleni clutched the tablet, her match burning out, plunging the chamber into darkness. The hum faded, but the shadow's presence lingered, its voice echoing in her mind, "Speak my name." She didn't know if she was the flame or the one to be claimed, but the prophecy was awake, and there was no turning back. What had she unleashed, and what would it demand next? If you faced the oracle's shadow, would you speak its name or run from its fire? Drop a comment with your choice, and tap that share button to spread the oracle's awakening. Chapter 12, The Vatican's Hunters. The hidden chamber beneath Delphi's Temple of Apollo was a tomb of shadows, its air thick with the scent of myrrh and the electric hum of something ancient, awakened. Eleni Costa stood frozen before the cracked stone altar, the clay tablet in her hands pulsing with unnatural warmth, its serpent symbol glowing faintly under the dim light of her rekindled match. The words etched on the tablet, "Speak the flame," and the god's return burned in her mind, as did the vision she'd seen, cities ablaze, a serpent rising, a world reshaped by the oracle's prophecy. The shadow of the last Pythia, her ember-white eyes and flaming crown, had vanished, but its presence lingered, its voice echoing in Eleni's bones, "You are the flame. Will you speak, or will you burn?" Her phone buzzed, the screen glowing with a new message in Latin, "Ignis vivit, umbra sequitur." The shadow follows. The photo attached showed her in the chamber, the tablet in her hands, the timestamp seconds old. Someone or something was watching, and it wasn't just the shadow. Eleni's heart pounded as she stuffed the tablet and folio into her backpack, the hum fading but the air still heavy, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. She'd spoken the chant, awakened the prophecy, and now the cave felt alive, its carving serpents, stars, unblinking eyes pulsing with a rhythm she couldn't hear but felt, like a heartbeat from the earth. Samuel's disappearance, Sophia's warnings, the Vatican's relentless pursuit, they all pointed to one truth: the oracle's power was real, and she'd unleashed it. But at what cost? She grabbed her dead flashlight, its battery drained, and lit another match, its tiny flame trembling in the darkness. She had to get out, to find answers, but the cave's exit seemed farther now, the passage narrower, as if the walls were closing in. She retraced her steps, her boots scraping against the stone floor, the match casting jagged shadows that twisted like smoke. The scent of myrrh grew sharper, suffocating, and the hum returned, faint but insistent, weaving into a chant that tugged at her mind, Pythia. Speak my name. Eleni's breath hitched, her eyes darting to the carvings, their eyes seeming to follow her. She thought of the photo, of the shadow's warning, and quickened her pace, the match burning low. As she reached the serpent-marked stone at the cave's entrance, a new sound stopped her cold, a low, deliberate scrape, like boots on gravel, coming from above. Eleni extinguished the match, plunging the cave into darkness, and crouched behind the stone slab, her heart racing. The scrape grew louder, joined by hushed voices, clipped and urgent, speaking in Italian. She peered over the slab, her eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through the ravine. 3 figures stood at the edge, their silhouettes sharp against the night sky. They wore plain clothes, black coats, no clerical collars, but their movements were precise, disciplined, like soldiers. One held a flashlight, its beam sweeping the ravine, while another clutched a small metal case, its surface etched with a cross and a serpent. Eleni's stomach twisted. These weren't tourists or archaeologists. These were the Vatican's hunters, the custodes umbri, the keepers of the shadow whispered about in Sophia's stories, a secret order tasked with silencing threats to the church. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face, spoke in a low voice. She's here. The tablet's been activated. We can't let her leave. Eleni's blood ran cold. They knew about the tablet, the ritual, her. She clutched her backpack, the folio and tablet heavy inside, and pressed herself against the stone, her breath shallow. The hum surged again, vibrating in her chest, and she felt a pull, like a tide urging her back to the chamber. The shadow was still here, watching, waiting. But the hunters were closer, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness, inching toward the cave's entrance. She weighed her options: run and risk capture, or stay and face the shadow. The hunters' voices grew clearer, one of them reciting a prayer in Latin, its rhythm sharp and commanding, like a ward against the hum. Eleni's mind raced. She thought of Samuel, his reckless chant, his disappearance. She thought of Sophia, her warning about the shadow's claim. The tablet in her backpack felt alive, its warmth seeping through the fabric, and she knew she couldn't let the hunters take it. Not yet. She slipped deeper into the cave, her hands brushing the walls for guidance, the carvings rough under her fingers. The hum grew louder, the air crackling with static, and she felt the shadow's presence, heavy and watchful, like eyes boring into her back. The hunters' footsteps followed, their flashlight beams dancing across the passage, and Eleni's heart pounded as she ducked into a narrow alcove, its walls etched with serpents and stars. She lit another match, its flame trembling, and opened the folio, her eyes scanning the text for anything that could help. A new passage caught her eye, written in a hurried hand: the flame protects, but the shadow hunts. Speak the name, and the path opens. The hunters' voices grew closer, their prayer louder, and Eleni's match flickered, casting shadows that twisted into shapes: a woman's silhouette, her eyes white as embers, her hand pointing deeper into the cave. The hum became a chant, words in an ancient tongue that Eleni felt in her bones: Pythia. Speak my name. She hesitated, her throat tight, but the hunters were too close, their flashlight beams grazing the alcove's edge. She whispered the chant, her voice trembling: Ignis loquitur, serpens oratur. The cave shook, a low rumble rising from the earth, and the alcove's wall slid aside, revealing a hidden passage, its walls glowing with golden light. Eleni stumbled forward, the hunters' shouts echoing behind her, their prayer breaking into chaos. The passage was narrow, its air cold and heavy, the carvings denser, now serpents coiling around altars, priestesses raising hands to a star-filled sky. The hum surged, the shadow's presence stronger, and Eleni felt a rush, like fire coursing through her veins. The hunter's footsteps faded, but a new sound replaced them, a low, guttural growl, like a beast stirring in the dark. She emerged into a smaller chamber, its ceiling low, its walls covered with carvings of the last Pythia, her flaming crown blazing in the golden light. At the center stood another altar, smaller, its surface etched with a single word, Pythia. The tablet in her backpack pulsed, its warmth burning now, and Eleni felt the shadow's eyes on her, its voice clear, "You are the flame. Speak, or burn." She clutched the tablet, her mind reeling. The hunters were behind her, the shadow before her, and the prophecy was alive, its power pulling at her soul. Her phone buzzed, the screen glowing with a new message in archaic Greek: "The path is open, but the shadow hunts." Attached was a photo of the hidden passage, taken from above, showing Eleni standing before the altar, the serpent symbol glowing at her feet. The timestamp was seconds ago. Her blood ran cold. The shadow wasn't just in the cave, it was everywhere, and the hunters were closing in. What had she awakened, and could she survive its call? If you were trapped between the Vatican's hunters and the oracle's shadow, would you fight or flee? Drop a comment with your choice, and tap that subscribe button to uncover what the prophecy demands next. Chapter 13, The Final Prophecy. The hidden chamber beneath Delphi's temple of Apollo thrummed with an ancient pulse, its walls alive with the glow of carved serpents and stars that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of Eleni Kostas's last match. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh, sharp and suffocating, mingling with the damp, earthy tang of the cave. Eleni stood before the small altar at the chamber's heart, the clay tablet in her hands burning with unnatural warmth, its serpent symbol pulsing like a heartbeat. The words etched on its surface, "Speak the flame," and "the God's return," echoed in her mind, intertwined with the vision she'd seen: cities ablaze, a serpent rising, a world reshaped by the oracle's prophecy. The shadow of the last Pythia, her ember-white eyes and flaming crown, had vanished, but her voice lingered, a chant that wove through the hum filling the cave: "You are the flame. Speak, or burn." Behind her, the footsteps of the Vatican's hunters, the Custodes Umbri, echoed in the hidden passage, their Latin prayers sharp and urgent, a ward against the power she'd unleashed. Eleni's heart pounded, her breath shallow in the cold, charged air. The tablet felt alive, its warmth seeping into her skin, urging her to speak the final chant. The folio, tucked in her backpack, had revealed the ritual's last step: under the light of Sirius, at the seventh dawn, speak the flame's name 3 times. The prophecy will live, and the gods will rise. But the warnings were stark: the shadow claims its own. Samuel had spoken the chant and vanished, his white-eyed image haunting her phone. Now, she'd spoken it too, and the cave had responded, its altar splitting to reveal the tablet, its walls trembling with a power she couldn't comprehend. The hunters were closing in, their flashlight beams slicing through the passage, and the shadow was here, watching, waiting. She lit another match, its tiny flame trembling in the stillness, and opened the folio, its pages glowing under the light. The text described the final prophecy, spoken by the last Pythia in 362 CE as the Roman Empire turned to Christianity. It wasn't just a prediction, it was a command, a call to break the chains of history, to restore a world where gods walked among men. The prophecy spoke of a new dawn, where the serpent would rise, and the veil between worlds would part, revealing a truth the Church had buried: the divine was not above but within, accessible to all who spoke the flame's name. Elene's mind reeled. The church hadn't feared the oracle's power because it was heresy, it feared it because it was true, a truth that could unravel their authority. The hum surged, a chorus of voices weaving through the air, and Eleni felt a pull, like a tide dragging her toward the altar. The tablet's serpent symbol blazed, its eyes alive with golden light, and she saw her again, the shadow of the last Pythia, her form flickering at the chamber's edge, her eyes white as embers, her hair crowned with flames. The shadow spoke, her voice a chant that burned in Elene's mind, "Speak the name, and the gods return." The words carried a vision: temples rising from the earth, skies splitting, a serpent coiling around a world reborn. But there was another figure in the vision, cloaked in shadow, its eyes white, its voice her own, whispering, "The shadow claims." Elene's hands shook as she set the tablet on the altar, its glow illuminating the carvings, priestesses raising hands to a star-filled sky, serpents coiling around altars, eyes watching from the dark. The hunters' voices grew louder, their prayers breaking into shouts, and Elene knew she had seconds to decide. Speak the chant, complete the ritual, or run and hope the shadow didn't follow. She thought of Samuel, of Sophia's warnings, of the Vatican's relentless pursuit. The prophecy was a key, but to what? A new world, or her own destruction? The hum became a roar, the air crackling with static, and Eleni felt a rush, like fire coursing through her veins. She spoke the chant, her voice trembling but resolute, "Ignis loquitur, serpens oratur, nomen flammam." The words were heavy, alive, and the moment they left her lips, the chamber shook, dust falling from the ceiling, the altar's glow flaring into a blinding light. The shadow of the Pythia appeared before her, no longer a flicker but solid, her robes flowing like liquid fire, her eyes burning with a truth Eleni couldn't bear. The vision returned, clearer now, a world reshaped, but not by gods. By men, their hands stained with blood, their voices chanting the flame's name, their world unraveling as the serpent rose. Then, a betrayal. A figure stepped from the shadows, not the Pythia but someone familiar: Father Matteo Rossi, the Vatican priest who demanded the papyrus in Athens. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, but his hands held a dagger, its blade etched with a serpent. "You shouldn't have spoken," he said, his voice low but firm. "The prophecy can't be allowed to live." Elene's heart stopped. "You," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've been following us, sending the messages." Matteo's eyes flickered with regret, but his grip on the dagger tightened. "I tried to warn you. The church can't let this power return. It's not a prophecy, it's a weapon. And you've just armed it." The chamber shook again, the hum a deafening chorus, and the shadow of the Pythia raised a hand, her eyes blazing. Eleni felt a pull, like a tide dragging her toward the altar, and the tablet glowed brighter, its serpent symbol pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The hunters burst into the chamber, their flashlights blinding, their prayers a desperate chant, but the shadow's presence overwhelmed them, its voice drowning out their words, "The gods return." Eleni stumbled back, the tablet in her hands, as Matteo lunged, his dagger gleaming. She dodged, the blade grazing her arm, and the chamber erupted in chaos, dust falling, carvings glowing, the shadow's chant shaking the walls. The hunters shouted, their prayers breaking, and Eleni ran, clutching the tablet, the folio heavy in her backpack. The passage twisted, the hum following, and she felt the shadow's eyes on her, its voice clear, "You are the flame. Speak, or burn." She emerged into the ravine, the night sky above Delphi blazing with stars, Sirius shining brightest, its light a beacon. The hunter's shouts echoed behind her, but the shadow was closer, its presence heavy, its chant relentless. Her phone buzzed, the screen glowing with a new message in archaic Greek: the prophecy lives, but the shadow hunts. Attached was a photo of the chamber, taken from above, showing Eleni fleeing, Matteo's dagger raised, the shadow of the Pythia looming over them both. The timestamp was seconds ago. Eleni's blood ran cold. The prophecy was alive, and so was the shadow. Matteo's betrayal had revealed the truth: the church wasn't just hiding the oracle's power, it was fighting to control it. But what did the prophecy mean, and who would survive its awakening? If you were Eleni, would you trust Matteo's warning or embrace the prophecy's power? Drop a comment with your choice, and hit that like button to uncover the oracle's final truth. Chapter 14, The Echoes Remain. The dawn broke over Delphi's rugged cliffs, painting the ruins of the Temple of Apollo in hues of gold and shadow, but the air was heavy with an unnatural chill, laced with the persistent scent of myrrh. Eleni Costa stumbled out of the hidden cave, her breath ragged, the clay tablet and stolen folio clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her arm stung where Father Matteo Rossi's dagger had grazed her, a shallow cut that burned with a heat that wasn't entirely physical. The prophecy she'd unleashed in the chamber below speak the flame, and the god's return still thrummed in her veins, its vision of a world reshaped, of serpents rising and skies ablaze, searing her mind. The shadow of the last Pythia, with her ember-white eyes and flaming crown, had vanished, but her voice lingered, a chant that wove through the hum of the mountain: you are the flame. Speak, or burn. Behind her, the shouts of the Vatican's hunters, the custodes umbri, had faded, but the memory of Matteo's betrayal, his dagger, his haunted eyes, his warning that the prophecy was a weapon clung to her like a second skin. Eleni scrambled up the ravine, her boots slipping on loose gravel, the tablet's warmth pulsing against her chest. The stars above were fading, but Sirius, the brightest, still shone, its light a beacon that seemed to call to the tablet, to the prophecy she'd awakened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she hesitated, dreading another message. The screen glowed with a new text in archaic Greek: the god's return, but the shadow remains. Attached was a photo of the ravine, taken from above, showing Eleni fleeing, the serpent-marked stone glowing behind her, the timestamp seconds old. Her blood ran cold. The shadow wasn't just in the cave, it was everywhere, and it wasn't done with her. She reached her jeep, parked at the edge of the ruins, and collapsed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she locked the doors. The folio and tablet lay on the passenger seat, their warmth seeping into the air, the serpent symbols glowing faintly, as if alive. Eleni's mind raced, replaying the vision: cities crumbling, a serpent coiling around the stars, a world reborn not by gods but by human hands, their voices chanting the flame's name. The prophecy wasn't just a prediction, it was a call to action, a truth the church had buried for centuries: the divine was within, accessible to all who dared to speak. But Matteo's words haunted her: it's not a prophecy, it's a weapon. Had she unleashed a power she couldn't control, or had she uncovered a truth the world needed to hear? She drove toward Athens, the road twisting through the mountains, the hum of the cave fading but never gone, like a heartbeat in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, and she ignored it, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She needed to find Sofia Moretti, the only person who might understand what she'd done. But as she reached the city, the streets alive with morning traffic, she noticed something strange: graffiti on a wall, a serpent coiled around a flame, its lines sharp and fresh, as if painted overnight. Her stomach twisted. The symbol was everywhere on posters, in shop windows, even scratched into the pavement. It wasn't vandalism, it was a message, a sign that the prophecy was spreading. Sophia's apartment was quiet, its windows dark, but the door was ajar, a faint glow spilling from within. Eleni pushed it open, her heart pounding, and found Sophia sitting at her table, surrounded by books and artifacts, her face pale but resolute. The folio's serpent symbol was drawn on a piece of paper before her, its lines glowing faintly, and the air was thick with myrrh. "You spoke the chant," Sophia said, her voice low, not a question. "The prophecy is alive now." Eleni set the tablet and folio on the table, her hands trembling. "I didn't have a choice. The hunters were coming. Matteo betrayed us. He said the prophecy was a weapon, that the church would do anything to stop it." Sophia's eyes narrowed, her fingers tracing the tablet's serpent symbol. "He's not wrong. The prophecy isn't just words, it's power. The Pythia didn't predict the future, they shaped it. The church buried it because it gave people freedom, the kind they couldn't control. But you've awakened it, and now it's spreading." Eleni frowned, her skepticism flaring despite the weight of what she'd seen. "Spreading? How? I only spoke the chant in the cave." Sophia gestured to her laptop, its screen open to a social media platform buzzing with posts. Videos, photos, and cryptic messages, all tagged #Delphic Revival, showed the serpent symbol painted across cities: Athens, Rome, even New York. Teenagers chanted phrases in ancient Greek, their voices echoing the folio's words. A TikTok video showed a girl with a serpent tattoo, her eyes gleaming as she whispered, "Ignis loquitur." A Discord thread discussed the prophecy, quoting the folio's text verbatim, as if someone had leaked it. Eleni's blood ran cold. The prophecy wasn't just alive, it was viral, spreading faster than she could comprehend. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "No one else had the folio." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The shadow carries the flame. You spoke the chant, but the Pythia's power doesn't need paper, it lives in the words, in the air, in the minds of those who hear it. The church tried to silence it, but it's too late. The world is listening." The room grew colder, the scent of myrrh overwhelming, and Eleni felt the hum again, faint but growing, like a chant rising from the earth. The tablet on the table pulsed, its serpent symbol glowing brighter, and for a moment, she swore she saw the shadow, the last Pythia, her ember-white eyes watching from the corner of the room. The hum became a voice, soft but insistent, "The gods return." Eleni's heart raced as she grabbed her phone, its screen glowing with a new message: "The flame spreads, but the shadow hunts." Attached was a photo of Sophia's apartment, taken from above, showing Eleni and Sophia at the table, the tablet glowing between them. The timestamp was seconds ago. Eleni's breath caught. "They're still watching us," she said, her voice trembling. "The Vatican, the shadow, someone knows everything." Sophia nodded, her face grim. "The Custodes Umbri won't stop. They've hunted the oracle's power for centuries, and now you've given it a voice. But the shadow is worse, it's not just hunting you. It's choosing who speaks next." Eleni's mind reeled. The prophecy was no longer hers to control, it was alive, spreading through the world, carried by voices she couldn't silence. She thought of Matteo, his dagger, his betrayal, and wondered if he was still out there, hunting her, or if the shadow had claimed him too. The graffiti, the social media posts, the chants, they were signs of a new movement, a Delphic revival, but they were also a warning. The prophecy promised freedom, But at what cost? And who would pay it? As she left Sophia's apartment, the city buzzing with life, Eleni saw the serpent symbol again, painted on a wall, its eyes glowing under a street lamp. The hum followed her, weaving into a chant, and she felt the shadow's presence, its ember-white eyes watching from the dark. The prophecy was alive, but so was the shadow, and its hunt was far from over. If you saw the serpent symbol spreading, would you join the revival or run from its power? Drop a comment with your choice, and share this story to uncover what the oracle's legacy holds.